Hey everybody, it's Derek and welcome back to CRM Tip of the Day's Video Tips, your source for tips and step-by-step instruction on the latest version of Microsoft Dynamics CRM. So in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about CRM's automatic record creation and update rules. I was at Extreme CRM here a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about some of the new features that are coming out with the release of CRM 2016, like Interactive Service Hub and some of the external access for entities and different things like that. And just through casual conversation with several people, I noticed that a lot of people haven't really played with some of the features that were released as part of the spring update with the 2013 release or in the spring of 2014, such as things like your record creation rules and your routing rules, and even to a certain degree, entitlements and service level agreements. So I thought, kind of while we're waiting for some of the new features to come out with 2016, maybe we would take some time and address some of these features that are actually really cool and give you a lot of flexibility that maybe you just based upon what it is that you're doing, just haven't had an opportunity to play with. And so I thought we'd start today a little bit with automatic record creation and update rules. And the process behind them is very simplistic when you think about it. You want to take, some type of item that comes in maybe to a queue or something like that. For example, maybe an email. So somebody sends an email to a support request queue. Ultimately, what you would like to be able to do is to evaluate specific things about that email, determine, maybe who it's coming from, or, if they have a entitlement record with your organization, or if they're coming from a customer that's a preferred customer, and maybe based upon those situations, have the system create a case for you, and then maybe even use routing rules down the road to kind of route that information. And so it gives you some very nice flexibility to be able to kind of build some of this functionality based upon what it is that you want to do. So we're going to go ahead and talk just a little bit about automatic record creation today. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back, so we'll go ahead and look. So we switch back to CRM. So let's go ahead and explore this functionality a little bit. So I'm going to go to Settings, and I'm actually going to go into the Service Management area. And within here, this is where you can define a lot of the service-based situations, obviously, that you want to work with, such as queue creation, routing rule sets. This is where you can define subjects for your organization. This is where if you want to play with some of the parent case child settings, where you can work with it from there. But this is also where you can go in and create automatic record creation and update rules. Now, when they were first created, they were really focused specifically just on cases. So something would come in basically from either a social activity or from a email, and you wanted to create a case record. Now they've recently expanded with several pieces of functionality that now allow you to actually look at it from really any type of activity type, but also to create really any type of record within the application. So maybe you have like a sales queue where if somebody sends an inquiry into your organization and you want to have a lead or an opportunity generated based upon an email coming into like per se a sales queue, you could actually use these same types of situations to create opportunities or leads in the application. So if I come in here and I just click on new, this will open up kind of the record creation engine that allows me to kind of work with it. And so what you can see in here is there's going to be a few different options that I can define from kind of an application standpoint. Obviously the first thing that I need to have in here would be some type of name. So in this case, we're just going to call this support case creation. Okay, so then you have to specify kind of a source type. Now there's a few different options that you have here when you're kind of working through it. Obviously, most of your activity-based situations that you would be working with, phone calls, emails, appointments, service activities are all represented within here as well, but also any custom activity. So if you go in and create kind of a custom activity for some type of situation that you might use, as soon as that custom activity is created, they will show up in here as well. You also have an opportunity to work with social activities. So if maybe you're using like some of the link to CRM functionality to link a social activity to you from social engagement to CRM, you could actually have that show up as a social activity. Once it's registered as a social activity, you can now use this to create a specific record in the application. Now we're going to go ahead and specify email as the option that we want to work with. Now you've got a couple of options when it comes to the queue. So you can specify kind of a non-queue based rule where you just leave it blank and it kind of applies when items come in, and it's not necessarily queue specific at this point, but you can also define it at a queue level. So for example, if somebody sends an email to like our support request queue, I could have it come in from there. Now you'll notice that there's a channel properties or an additional properties. This is where if you're working with like external resources and different things, you can actually use JSON to claim specific properties and define specific properties for individual channels. So you could use those as means to propagate some of like the headings and sources and information that might be coming in when the actual case is created within the application. The next thing that you'll see in here is where you specify your conditions for your record creation. Now, there's a couple of different factors that you want to keep in mind with this. The first one here where it says records for emails from unknown senders. So basically, it's going to want to look for people that it recognizes. So contacts, accounts, those types of different situations. If you want it to be able to create records, maybe a lead or something like that from people that are coming in, but you don't necessarily have them in the system, you could check the create records for unknown senders. And this would say, regardless of who it's coming from, it's obviously going to create the record. Now, be aware of that based upon if it's a support queue, because now any junk email into different situations that would be coming into that queue would potentially have cases or other record types created for them. If you want to associate it or make sure that the customer has a valid entitlement, you can do this. So what this will do is this will just verify that there is an entitlement that is active for this particular customer, and it will then go ahead and create the case or the record based upon that situation. If that's unchecked, as long as it's a customer, it'll go ahead and create the record, whether they have an entitlement to attach it to or not. Very handy if you're trying to do kind of case creation options for this. And then the next option that you have is, if this is an activity that was maybe associated with a resolved case, so maybe you've resolved something in the past and now somebody is responding back to maybe an email that was sent out from that different situation, now it's going to realize that that's an activity that was initially associated with a case. And so this would now give you the capabilities to go in and start working with some of those individual situations. And the nice thing about that is you can actually look at and define the number of days that you would want it to look at. So it will only create a case when the associated activity has been resolved for X number of days or something like that. In this case, we'll just go ahead and leave it blank. Now, like any situation, if you are going to be creating a case or creating a record, specifically a case, you would probably want to let people know that the case was created and that somebody's working on it. So in here, you can actually respond back to the customer and you can specify a specific template that you want to use to reply some type of feedback to the customer. So I could go in here and say a case auto response. Now, if you check that you want to do an automated email response, you do have to specify a template. It won't let you save the actual rule until you've specified the template. Once you've got kind of the logistics in place, so the source type, the queue, those kind of things, now you can go ahead and save it, because you can't actually define the specific creation rules and update rules until it's actually been saved. Once it's saved, now the subgrid's going to display the add symbol, so you can go ahead and add it in here. Now, one rule can have multiple conditions and kind of multiple criteria associated with it, which is very handy from a standpoint when you think about the fact that maybe you have different tiers of customers. And so, based upon if that customer is a preferred customer or if that customer has a gold service contract with you or something like that, maybe you want the case to be created with this specific details. If it's coming from somebody who's maybe a premier customer, maybe you want it to be created with additional details. And so this really gives you the capabilities to kind of broaden that out based upon what it is that you want to do. Now, in this case, we'll just call this generic. And then I will save it. And just like anything, I have to save it before I can actually go in and start defining conditions and actions and update rules. So now you'll see in here that I can go in and specify what it is that I want to use to determine if a record of some kind should be created for this particular email or item that's coming into play. So I have kind of a condition designer that's really just an advanced find. So the nice thing about this is when I click on select, I've got all my standard CRM things. I've got my emails, I've got my regardings and all those kind of things. But if I scroll down, I actually have some items that are specific to the email. The sender account, the sender's mailbox, the sender's contact. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility based upon reading contents of the actual email and making determinations maybe based upon keywords that are in the email or specific items, what you want to do with it. Now, in this case, I could maybe say, okay, if the sender's account, so if the person who's sending me the email, if they're coming from an account in CRM, and that account is designated as a preferred customer, what do I want to do? So if the preferred customer equals yes, I want to do something. So this is kind of cool because now I can actually look at the account for the person who sent me the email, and if I have custom fields or specific items in there, I can start to actually reach into those a little bit and use those to make the determination based upon what it is that I want to do. Now I can come in here and I can actually specify, what I want to happen. So from an action standpoint, you really see that you only have one option here, the option to create a record. Now, when I click on create record, I have the ability to create several different types of records based upon what it is that I want to do. So really, I have every entity in CRM for the most part that I want to work with based upon solutions that are installed and custom entities that have been created. So I really can, create an opportunity, a lead, really any type of record in CRM that I want to work with. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit case. And now I want to define the specific properties for this case. So it's really just like if I was going to define this information via workflow. I would go into my editor. And define the specific information that I want for this. So the case title is going to actually be propagated based upon the subject of the email. Here's where I could actually, if I had defined specific properties for the channel, this is where I could actually go in and I could use those items from the channel to kind of pre-populate some of this information. Now, since I don't necessarily have it associated with an external channel or anything at that point, I can just replace this with generalized information. So now in this case, I could go into the customer field, use my look for, scroll down, find the sender's account, fill in the account, go into the origin. Because I set this up as a source type of email, I know it's coming from an email, so I can specify email. And then I could even come in here on the contact and I could say, okay, from here, now let's go in, and if I know that the sender was a contact, look at the sender's contact record and associate it with the contact. And then I could define, any other types of information that I would want to have specific to this case. Subjects, entitlements. The nice thing about with the new default entitlement capabilities that you have from a CRM perspective is I really wouldn't even have to specify an entitlement if I didn't want to, because I can specify a default entitlement for the organization. In this case, I'll just go ahead and hit save and close. Now, I could just continue to kind of build these individual situations. Now, the one thing to keep in mind after I save and close this particular option, now I could come in here and there's other options here where I could, create another record, or I could update an existing record. I could send an email. I could even, if I create a workflow, I could even start a child workflow and execute maybe some specific functionality within a workflow based upon this stuff. So you can see that I have a lot of flexibility here based upon what it is that I want to do. Now I'm going to hit save and close here. And the big thing, or the one thing I want to kind of call out, is you'll notice here that in my record options, it's got the rule that I created. As I mentioned, I could have multiple rules or kind of multiple creation specifications here if I wanted to, but remember that they are evaluated in the order specified. So it's kind of like your standard if-else statement. Take your ones at the top and kind of build your way down and making it kind of broader as you're going through, because as soon as it finds a match, it's going to stop processing those rules. So if you have multiple options in here and one of them is very vague, it's going to accomplish that right away, and then it's going to basically stop processing that. Now I can go ahead and activate it. Now, a couple of things that you want to kind of keep in mind here. You'll notice on this message it says for rules that are kind of associated with a queue, or if they're not associated with a queue, you can only have one active rule for each one of those sources. So if I activate this rule, it's telling me that any previously activated rule for this type will be deactivated. So basically what this is saying is you can only define one case creation or record creation rule per source type. So if I've already kind of, defined one for email and I've defined it for the support request, I can't create another email rule for the support request. I can only have one rule kind of per source type per queue that I'm specifying. Now I could go in and specify one for appointments. I could specify one for tasks, custom activities, but I couldn't specify another one for email for the support support request. And so if you're going to create, kind of generic rules that are going to kind of be all encompassing and not be associated with a queue, keep that in mind, because you can only have one of those per source. So I could only have one kind of generic email rule. Now I could go ahead and activate this, and once activated, if somebody were to send an email to the support request queue, it would recognize the email, it would go in, automatically take that email, create a case, and then leave the case in the support queue. Or if I had a routing rule set in place, I could actually have it route that case based upon that scenario. Now, once the record is created, that activity then is actually removed. So that email would be removed from that particular item, and the case would actually replace that within the application. So for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to play with record creation and update rules, I hope this helped to kind of give you a nice starting point and kind of work through it. For those of you who maybe have had some experience with it, but maybe haven't played with it a lot, maybe this helped you kind of see some of the new features that they've added, because they've really added quite a few and they keep kind of expanding the scope of this. So, before you start creating kind of your own custom workflows and items from that, and remember, these engines are really built on the workflow engine, so it's executing the same functionality that you in essence could do with a workflow. It's just in a more automated interface. But before you start digging in and creating kind of your own custom workflows, or maybe even developing certain situations to make this happen, I would highly recommend taking a look at case creation rules, because it's very easy to implement. They're very easy to set up. You just have to kind of fine tune them a little bit, and they'll work very well for you based upon what it is you want to do. So again, for all of us here at CRM Tip of the Day, this has been Derek. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and have a good one.